Today is January 16th. It's the 16th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. I've said it before, there's a day for everything. World this day and national that day. And there's even a day for nothing. And that day is today, National Nothing Day. National Nothing Day is proposed in 1972 by a newspaper man named Harold Pullman Coffin, and the day is first observed the following year on this day in 1973. Not much is known about Coffin, appropriately enough for the instigator of National Nothing Day. He's born in Nevada in 1905 and works as a columnist for the San Francisco Examiner. Coffin passes away in 1981, but not before establishing National Nothing Day on this day as a day to, quote, provide Americans with one national day when they can just sit around without celebrating, observing, or honoring anything. Occasionally, National Nothing Day, January 16th, falls on the third Monday of the month, as it does in 2017, and the third Monday in January is, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, in which case, the day on which nothing is celebrated, commemorated, honored, or observed is put on hold for a year, while we honor and celebrate the life and work of the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whom we've discussed a number of times on this show. Born on this day in 1901, Frank Zamboni, engineer and inventor of the modern ice rink resurfacer, the Zamboni. Zamboni is born in Eureka, Utah. Bet you didn't see that one coming. He grows up on a farm in Idaho, and then, as a young man, moves with his family to Los Angeles. He opens an electrical supply shop with his brother in 1922. And in 1927, they expand into the refrigeration business, working with dairy farmers and produce distributors, and they build a plant for making blocks of ice. The ice block business is good for the next 10 years, until refrigerators and freezers become commonplace in the average American home, and folks no longer need to buy ice when they can just make it in their own kitchen. In 1939, Zamboni starts to think about what else he could use all that ice-making and refrigeration equipment for. He decides to open up an ice rink, opening the Iceland Rink in Paramount, California. Iceland is a hit with the community, but it's labor-intensive too. It takes a crew of 5 people an hour and a half each night to lay down a new sheet of ice for skaters to use the next day. Zamboni sets out to come up with a better method. He starts with the vehicle and works on a machine to mount on the vehicle that will lay down a new layer of ice. He builds it on the chassis of a World War II surplus Jeep, adds to it the front ends from 2 different Dodges, a bunch of pulleys, and a bin to catch ice shavings. It takes him 9 years to develop it, but in 1949, Frank Zamboni completes his masterpiece. An ice resurfacer with a blade that shaves the ice, a thin layer of water that gets laid down, followed by a squeegee to produce a smooth sheet of ice. All in a machine that can be run by one person who completes the task in 15 minutes. His son Richard Zamboni says of his father's 9-year saga, quote, one of the reasons he stuck with it was everyone told him he was crazy. When he finally finished, he was so sick of it that he didn't even bother painting it. Zamboni puts his contraption to use at Iceland and Paramount, but before long, there's interest in it from other parts of the country. First, from ice skating legend Sonja Henie, who visits the Iceland rink and asks Zamboni to make a Zamboni for her. And then Chicago Stadium, home of the Blackhawks, requests a Zamboni. The Zamboni does wonders for the Blackhawks. The only problem is that fans stop going to the concession stands in between periods. They'd rather stay in their seats and watch the Zamboni go round and round. Soon, more and more rinks want a Zamboni of their own, and Frank Zamboni forms Zamboni & Company in 1950 to manufacture and sell his namesake invention. Frank Zamboni, born on this day in 1901, marvels at the success of his invention, saying, quote, I don't understand it. I was just trying to find a better way of doing something. He passes away in 1988 at the age of 87. The family company continues to make Zambonis. More than 10,000 have been sold to date. As a kid growing up in Buffalo, New York, going to Sabres games, my favorite part of the games, other than the fights, was when the Zamboni came out in between periods. Drove over rough and chopped up ice and left in its wake a smooth, glistening, brand new surface of ice. I like order. I'm into perfection. I thoroughly enjoyed watching the Zamboni. I always wanted to drive a Zamboni. Still do. Top of the bucket list. One of these days. There are 349 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. Also born on this day in 1932, Diane Fossey, zoologist and anthropologist. She spends 18 years studying the mountain gorilla in the forests of Rwanda. She publishes her findings in her 1983 book, Gorillas in the Mist. And then Diane Fossey is murdered 2 years later in 1985 in her camp in the Virunga Mountains. Her murder remains unsolved. She's buried in the gorilla graveyard she establishes at the Karasoke Research Center in Rwanda. So if you're still listening, happy nothing. Talk to you tomorrow.